The night it happened, nobody in that diner was paying attention to the woman in the corner booth. That was the problem with places like Kellerman's, a truck stop outside Kingsville, Texas, the kind that smelled like diesel and burnt coffee and had fluorescent lights that buzzed just loud enough to make you feel like something was always about to go wrong. It was the kind of place you stopped at because you had to, not because you wanted to. The kind of place where nobody looked twice at anybody, and everybody preferred it that way. She'd been there since 6:15. Black coffee, no menu. She sat with her back to the wall and her eyes on the door, which most people would have chalked up to habit if they'd noticed at all. She was 34 years old, 5'7", wearing a gray thermal under a canvas jacket that had seen better decades. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, no jewelry except a thin scar along her left jawline that disappeared into her collar. She looked like she might be a mechanic or a school teacher who'd had a hard year. She did not look like what she was. Her name was Voss, and by the time the evening was over, every person in that diner would know exactly who she was, even the ones who'd spent 20 minutes making sure she understood she didn't belong there. But we'll get to that. First, let's go back to the beginning. Sergeant First Class Elise Voss had been in the Army for 11 years when she walked into Kellerman's diner on the third Thursday of November. She wasn't on leave. She wasn't traveling for pleasure. She was driving from Fort Sam, Houston, back to a consulting job in Corpus Christi. Work she'd taken 6 months ago when her third deployment ended and the Army doctor told her the nerve damage in her right hand would disqualify her from frontline duty until further notice. She didn't argue. That surprised people who knew her, but Voss had learned a long time ago that arguing with things you cannot change is just noise. You adjust, you find the new angle, you solve the problem. She'd solved it by becoming a civilian contractor for SOCOM, Special Operations Command, doing assessments, training rotations, and the occasional evaluation that nobody put in writing. It was less dramatic than what she'd done before. It also paid better, which she used to feel guilty about until she stopped. The nerve damage had come from a road outside Mosul in 2019. She didn't talk about that either. She'd ordered her coffee, opened a map on her phone that she wasn't really looking at, and begun the process of unwinding. That was what she called it, unwinding, though it was less like relaxation and more like carefully decompressing from a pressure system. After 11 years of hypervigilance, her baseline was still too high for civilian spaces. Diner booths were manageable. Airports were harder. Crowded stadiums she avoided entirely. She was on her second cup when the group came in. There were 4 of them. 2 were in uniform. Army dress greens, which was unusual for a roadside diner at 7 in the evening. That told her something already. People who wore their dress uniform off-post were either going somewhere formal or coming from somewhere they wanted to be recognized for. Either way, they wanted to be seen. The tallest one, she clocked him immediately because that was how she processed rooms. Tallest to shortest, threat assessment, then detail, was a lieutenant colonel. Mid-40s, the kind of posture that comes not from discipline, but from years of being told he had good posture. His nameplate read Hargrove. He had the look of a man who had never once in his career doubted that he was the most important person in the room. The man beside him was a major. Younger, maybe 38, with the eager-to-please energy of someone who'd learned that agreeing with Hargrove was the shortest path to promotion. His nameplate read Dunnist. The other 2 were in civilian clothes, contractors or staff, from the way they deferred. One of them had a laugh that arrived before any joke had been made. The other one kept checking his phone. They took the booth directly across from Voss. She noticed this the way she noticed everything, without looking directly, without adjusting her posture, without giving any external signal that she was aware of them at all. It was a skill she'd developed over years of field work, this ability to observe without appearing to observe. Her team used to joke that Voss could read a room through the back of her head. She went back to her coffee. It started small. That was how it always started. Not with a declaration or a confrontation. Just a comment, pitched slightly too loud, allowed to land slightly too close. Some people just don't understand the concept of atmosphere, Hargrove said. He wasn't looking at her when he said it. He was looking at his menu. But the comment was angled, the way certain comments are, designed to be heard by the person they're about, while maintaining the fiction of being said to someone else. Voss heard it. She took a sip of coffee. Kellerman's has a dress code, Dunst added, smiling at his own joke. It's just not enforced. The one with the laugh laughed. The one with the phone glanced up briefly, then back down. Voss set her coffee cup down on the saucer with a small, precise click. She understood what was happening. She'd seen it before. Not just in diners, but in briefing rooms, on firing ranges, in places where her presence was either unexpected or unwelcome, and sometimes both. The calculation being made across the aisle was a simple one. Lone woman, civilian appearance, quiet, easy target for low-grade social pressure. The kind of thing that felt like conversation but functioned like a test. She had no interest in taking the test. She picked up her phone and typed a response to an email she'd been putting off. Hargrove ordered a steak. He sent it back twice. Once because it was too rare. Once because after it came back the second time, he decided it was now too well done. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with the particular patience of someone who has outlasted many lieutenant colonels, said, "Of course, sir," both times without a change of expression. Voss watched this and thought, that woman has more composure than half the platoons I've served with. The conversation at the other booth had turned louder. Hargrove was telling a story. Voss caught fragments, something about a range qualification, about a group of female candidates who'd had to retest. His tone was the particular one she recognized, not overtly hostile, just dismissive. The casual certainty that some categories of people are fundamentally less capable, dressed up as an observation about standards. Dunst nodded along. The logger laughed. Voss finished her second cup of coffee and signaled for a third. The waitress, her name tag read Deb, brought it over with the kind of quiet efficiency that felt like a small act of solidarity. "You need anything else, hon?" "I'm good," Voss said. "Thank you, Deb." Deb's eyes moved briefly to the booth across the aisle. Something passed across her face, the recognition of a woman who has watched this particular dynamic play out many times. She refilled Voss's cup and moved away. It escalated the way these things escalate, gradually, and then all at once. The man with the phone, she decided, he was the more dangerous of the two civilians, not physically, but in the specific social way of someone who performs bravado for an audience, had apparently decided that Voss's continued silence was an invitation. "Hey," he said it to the table first, not to her. Then, louder, "Hey." Voss looked up. "You've been nursing that coffee for an hour? You waiting on somebody? Or just killing time?" His tone was the tone of a man who had decided that an unaccompanied woman in a public space was available for conversation whether she wanted to be or not. There was nothing overtly aggressive in the words. The aggression was in the assumption underneath them. "Just the coffee," Voss said. She looked back down at her phone. There was a beat of silence. Then Hargrove said something to his table that she didn't catch, and the logger laughed, and Voss understood that she had just been the subject of a joke she wasn't meant to hear but absolutely was. She took a breath, slow, even. She'd been in rooms with people actively trying to kill her. She had, on 2 separate occasions, neutralized threats at distances that most credentialed army marksmen couldn't reliably manage with a scoped rifle. She had once spent 31 hours in a drainage ditch outside a compound in a country she still couldn't name publicly, waiting for a window that lasted 11 seconds, and she had not flinched. She was not going to let a lieutenant colonel with a bad steak and a worse attitude turn her third cup of coffee into a confrontation. And then the man with the phone stood up. He walked over the way men like that walk, with the specific gait of someone who is certain the walk itself is impressive. He stopped at the edge of her booth. He was maybe 6'1", broad, the kind of build that gets attention in gyms and parking lots. "You know what your problem is?" he said. She looked up at him. She said nothing. "You've got this whole mysterious thing going on." He gestured vaguely at her. "Like you're interesting, and you're just sitting here, being all cold. It's not mysterious, it's just rude." Voss looked at him for a moment. She had the stillness of someone who had learned, through extreme circumstances, that movement was a decision. Every action carried weight. She did not move unless she meant to. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Okay." His jaw tightened. That single syllable had done something to him, not an insult, not a dismissal, just a door closing quietly in his face. He wasn't sure what to do with it. "That's it? Okay?" "I'm not here to be interesting," she said. "I'm here to drink coffee." She looked back at her phone. He stood there for another 3 seconds. She counted, and then he reached out and put his hand flat on her table. Leaned down. The move was calculated for intimidation. She recognized it the way she recognized calibers, by effect. "I'm talking to you," he said. She looked at his hand on her table. Then she looked at him. "I know," she said. "You should stop." He didn't stop. What he did instead, which was the thing that changed the entire temperature of the room, was reach out and grab her wrist. Not violently, not yet, but with the kind of grip that said, "I have decided you are something I can handle." And that was where he made the error. Not the error of grabbing her wrist, though that was the visible one. The real error was the assumption underneath it. The same assumption that had been sitting in this diner since the moment they walked in. That she was background, that she was soft, that she was the kind of woman who could be managed. She let go of her phone. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. Later, Deb would tell her daughter, it happened so fast she almost missed it. The man with the phone would describe it differently. He would spend a considerable amount of time in the following weeks not describing it at all. Voss didn't stand up. She didn't have to. The mechanical advantage of her position, back to wall, seated, his body overextended toward her, was already sufficient. What she did with his wrist was efficient and, in its way, almost gentle. A rotation. A redirection. He found himself at an angle he did not choose, with her hand no longer where he'd held it, and a very clear understanding that he was no longer in control of the situation. She stood up then. She was still quiet. That was the thing that seemed to unsettle everyone in the diner most. Not the speed, not the technique, but the silence. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't even changed her expression. She simply stood up, and the man with the phone took 2 steps back, and she looked at him with the specific calm of someone who is deciding how much of herself to use. She decided to use very little. "Sit down," she said. Not loudly. Loudly would have been performance. This was instruction. He sat down. Hargrove stood up. He was the kind of man who stood up, Voss thought, who saw a situation he didn't understand and responded by making himself larger. She'd served under 3 of him, at 3 different posts, in 3 different decades. The type was consistent. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He wasn't asking her. He was asking the room. He was establishing jurisdiction. "Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove," she said. "I can read your nameplate." He stopped. "This is," he gestured at the man with the phone, who was now sitting very still and looking at the table. "He's a guest of mine, you don't." "He grabbed my wrist," she said. She didn't say it like an accusation. She said it like a fact, which it was. He grabbed my wrist," she said again. "That's not something I allow." Something in the way she said that made Hargrove pause. She could see him recalibrating, the specific micro-expression of a man who has just realized he might not have the clearest picture of what he's walking into. "And who exactly are you?" he said. It was the question, and she understood why he was asking it. In his experience, which was long and had taken him to a certain kind of comfortable altitude, the answer to that question from a woman in a canvas jacket in a roadside diner would be reassuring. A name, maybe a job title, maybe an apology, something that would let him reclaim the room. She didn't answer right away. She picked up her coffee cup. She finished what was left. She set it down and looked at Hargrove. "I'm the person who was trying to drink her coffee," she said. She reached into her jacket pocket and put enough cash on the table to cover the check and a 40% tip for Deb. She picked up her keys. "I'd recommend you think carefully about what happened tonight," she said. "Your guest made a choice. You were present for it. That's a fact that exists whether or not anyone writes it down." She turned and walked toward the door. She was almost through it when Hargrove said, "I will find out who you are." She paused, not from hesitation, just from the particular decision of whether something was worth responding to. She decided it was. She turned around. "You should," she said. "I think it'll be instructive." And she walked out into the Texas night. She was on the highway for 45 minutes before her phone rang. The number was one she recognized, a Fort Sam Houston exchange, which narrowed it considerably. She answered. "Voss, Sergeant First Class." The voice belonged to a man named Gentry, Colonel Marcus Gentry, who had overseen 3 of her deployments, who had written the evaluation that described her, in official Army language, as possessing marksmanship capability in the 99th percentile of assessed personnel, which was the most formal way anyone had ever said what she could do with a rifle at distance. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. When have I given you anything else, sir? Were you at Kellerman's Diner tonight?" "Kingsville." She watched the highway lights come and go. "Yes, sir." A pause. "Were you involved in an incident?" he said. "A man grabbed my wrist," she said. "I removed his hand." Another pause, longer. "The man whose hand you removed was Gerald Paxton. He is the Chief of Staff to Congressman Dale Whitlow, House Armed Services Committee." Voss kept her eyes on the road. The dashboard lights cast a faint green glow across her hands. "That's interesting," she said. "It gets more interesting," Gentry said. Hargrove called his JAG officer from the parking lot. Apparently he's describing it as an unprovoked assault. Voss exhaled slowly through her nose. There's a waitress named Deb, she said. At Kellerman's, she saw the whole thing. I imagine she did. There was something in Gentry's voice that she had learned, over many years, to read as the sound of a man choosing his next words carefully. Voss, I need you to understand what you've walked into. I didn't walk into anything, sir. I was drinking coffee. I know that. He paused again. Hargrove doesn't know who you are. He said he'd find out. He will. That's what I'm calling about. She heard the faint sound of papers being moved. When he finds out, he's going to have a choice to make. He's going to have to decide whether he wants to put his version of tonight's events into writing. And I thought you might want to know before he makes that decision, Gentry said. As a courtesy, she understood what he wasn't saying. What he was really telling her was, it's coming, get ready. What he was really asking was, are you going to be a problem? Or are you going to handle this the way you handle everything? I'll be in Corpus by 9, she said. Good, sir. She paused. He grabbed my wrist. I know, Voss. His voice was quiet. I know. The call Hargrove made to his JAG officer was the first in a sequence of calls that did not go the way he planned. The JAG officer, a captain named Tilly, who was young enough to still be frightened of getting things wrong, did what any competent JAG officer does before advising a senior officer on a potential complaint. She looked up the person the complaint was about. She found the name from the diner's credit card records. Voss had paid by card before she walked out. Elise M. Voss, Sergeant First Class, United States Army. 11th Special Forces Group, attached by contract to SOCOM. Then she found the service record. She read it once. Then she read the classified portion, which required 2 additional access codes and the kind of database clearance she'd had to request from her supervisor. She sat with it for a moment. Then she called Hargrove back. Sir, she said, I need to advise you very carefully before you put anything in writing. Advise away, he said. The woman at the diner. Tilly took a breath. She spent 6 years as a primary designated marksman with 3rd Special Forces Group. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 Iraq, 1 rotation in Africa Command. She holds the record for the longest confirmed engagement in her unit's history. The evaluation language in her file. Another breath. I've never seen language like that in 11 years of reading service records. There was silence on the other end. She's a civilian contractor now, Tilly said. But her status with SOCOM is active. She currently holds a security clearance at a level I'm not cleared to access the details of. A pause. Sir, if she says your guest grabbed her wrist and there are witnesses. There were people in the diner, Hargrove said. His voice had changed. Yes, sir. Tilly's voice had changed too. I would strongly recommend speaking with those witnesses before deciding on a course of action. He spoke with Deb. Deb had been waitressing at Kellerman's for 19 years. She had served truckers and tourists, and once memorably a sitting U.S. senator who tipped $4 on a $60 check. She had watched people at their best and their considerable worst. She had, in her own assessment, seen everything. She had not, until that Thursday in November, seen anything quite like Voss. She told Hargrove exactly what she'd seen. She told him calmly, in the same voice she used to describe the steak being sent back twice. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. Hargrove drove back to San Antonio that night without filing anything. Dunst, who'd spent most of the drive from Kingsville very quiet, said only one thing before they reached the city. Who did you say she was? He asked. I didn't, Hargrove said. Right. Dunst looked out the window. Maybe that should have been the first question. 3 days later, Voss got a call from Gerald Paxton. She was at a coffee shop in Corpus Christi, the kind she preferred, small, local, with a counter facing the window so she could sit with her back to the wall and watch the street. She answered on the 3rd ring. Mrs. Voss. His voice was carefully modulated, the voice of a man who spent his days managing situations. I'm calling to Mr. Paxton, she said. I wanted to offer. You grabbed my wrist, she said. Quiet, even, the same way she'd said it at Kellerman's. A long pause. Yes, he said. I did. Wrong, and I'm sorry. She listened to the street outside. A truck went by. Someone walked past with a dog. Apology noted, she said. I'd like to, Mr. Paxton. She set down her cup. I don't need anything from you. I don't need a statement or a gesture or a meeting. What I need is for that not to happen again. To me or anyone else. Of course. She let the silence sit. I've been told, Paxton said carefully, something about your background, your service. What about it? I didn't know. She looked out the window. A woman was walking past with 2 small children, one on each side, and she was talking to them about something, and the children were listening with the total absorption of people for whom the world has not yet been divided into categories of impressive and unimpressive. That's my point, Voss said. You didn't know, and it still shouldn't have happened. Another silence. Longer this time. No, he said. It shouldn't have. She hung up. She finished her coffee. She looked at the street for another minute. She thought about the drainage ditch in the country she couldn't name, and the 11 seconds, and the way the night had sounded when it was over. Not like victory, just like quiet. The particular silence of something finished. This felt a little like that. Not important in the same way, not dangerous. But the same principle underneath. The willingness to hold a line that nobody else could see, without announcing that you were holding it, without needing the room to know. She picked up her phone and typed the email she'd been putting off since the diner. Then she ordered another coffee and went back to work.